Hello everyone, and thanks for joining today's session on behavioral economics. My name is Dan Hill and I am the president of Sensory Logic Incorporated, a firm that specializes in gauging the psychophysiological reactions of consumers. Now, behavioral economics is a topic very close to my heart. I remember when I was launching my company 14 years ago, I was talking to someone who worked in business and she said, Dan, never forget to avoid the word problems. There are never problems in the business world. There are only opportunities. And I thought to myself, what a strange world I'm entering where you can't acknowledge a problem. One of the things I love about behavioral economics is I think it takes a much more realistic, candid view of human nature. It allows for the fact that, yes, there are solutions, yes, there are opportunities, but there are problems that are problems built right into human nature. I think most fundamentally behavioral economics acknowledges that fear drives a lot of consumer behavior, and that overconfidence, more so than well-placed hope, is often the other end of the spectrum. So with considerable excitement, I am happy to talk today about what is going on in the world of behavioral economics as it relates to our special interests, gauging and tracking emotions. So to begin, I often open by citing Decartes' Error by Antonio Damasio, and that is because it draws back on that most famous of comments that's really directed and misdirected Western culture for so long. That is Descartes at the height of the Enlightenment era saying, I think, therefore I am. What we have learned through behavioral economics, through the breakthroughs in brain science, is that it's emotions more than rational thinking that drives us, and that the Greeks and Descartes all had it wrong, that emotions are the stronger driver, and that the effectiveness of market research going forward depends on adhering closely to the strength of emotions in driving outcomes. Who was the first person to really take emotion seriously? It certainly wasn't Descartes. In fact, it was Darwin, Charles Darwin. Darwin figured that if emotions did not matter to us, they would have been weaned out of us over the course of evolution. And Darwin came to realize that in your face, you best reflect and communicate your feelings. More on that in a moment. So Darwin realized emotions were crucial, but who was the third D here? We're moving from Descartes to Darwin and now to Walt Disney. Because with Mickey Mouse, Walt seized on the fact that yes, we have affinities to people, to situations, to storytelling. Mickey's head kept getting larger, quite honestly, as Walt kept getting richer. But it's also true that Mickey's head and the smile on his face kept getting larger as Walt made more money. This was his fellow traveler in his discovery that emotions can be hugely profitable, and you want to create the right emotion at the right time. So Darwin did his fundamental, just almost instinctual work to know that emotions had to matter to you. If they didn't matter to us, they would have been weaned out again over the course of evolution. But it took World War II to help bring emotions front and center, and it is a revolution that has, of course, continued ever since. So many GIs suffered head wounds in World War II that the U.S. government threw research dollars after it. And within 3 years after the end of the war, we knew that human beings have, in fact, not just one brain or even two brains, that's 19th century science, but in fact 3 brains that came during different stages of evolution. There is a sensory brain, often called the reptilian brain, 500 million years old, and an emotional brain that's 200 million years old, the mammalian brain, and yes, a rational brain that came latest and is largest, but it does not have first mover advantage. What I find so exciting about behavioral economics is its willingness to put emotions front and center in terms of how people behave, what are the outcomes that you can expect. But this is something all of us in market research and business in general should have known since the late 1940s, and it's appalling how slowly that this has come into acceptance because, again, human beings are not truth machines. We like to lie to ourselves, and probably the biggest lie individually and as an entire Western civilization has been that we are supposedly rational decision makers. So just a few more facts on the triune brain, just quickly. About a quarter of the brain is devoted to processing visuals, we are all sensory logicians, that our emotional response happens 5 times more quickly than our rational response. There is no such thing as objectivity, and that the emotional brain sends 10 times as much information to the rational brain as vice versa. It is a trade imbalance, as if the emotional brain was China and the rational brain was, say, for instance, Cuba. And there is always more money being made in playing to the percentages. So speaking of Darwin, speaking of facial coding, there is a part of the brain that's devoted to reading other people's faces. And it's about 8 times more sensitive, this FFA area, 8 times more sensitive than the part of the brain that reads objects. Friend and foe, whether I'm with you, against you, is the most fundamental question in marketing as well as in business and life in general. And it's driven to a large extent by what emotions we see on the faces of others that tell us what's going to be the outcome. So from facial coding, from Darwin's original work and that of Professor Paul Ekman here in the United States, there are 7 core emotions that this technique can draw on, and 7 emotions that will be important to me as I talk about being on and off emotion in marketing and how that relates to behavioral economics. There is surprise, where the eyes go wide, we pay attention, great for breaking through the clutter. There is fear that paralyzes us, really almost the opposite of a successful call to action. There is disgust, which is rejection, and after all, marketing is really about trying to encourage the embrace rather than the rejection, so disgust is very worrisome indeed. There is contempt, which is almost an attitudinal version of disgust, signifying rejection. There is sadness, disappointment. You can think of it as buyer's regret. There is anger, which often arises out of confusion, but also resistance and resentment. And finally, thank God, happiness, what every company is hoping to promote in the lives of their loyal customers. So a lot of my talk today is about the fact that we have to get past the idea that there are no problems, only opportunities. Because to focus on happiness alone is as if, to mix my metaphors, you're a painter with only one color. You are like the Russian supremacist painter Malevich, whose famous white-on-white painting is maybe intriguing for what it did in the history of art history, but in market research terms, creates a very limited palette indeed. And I think what it leads to often is that you have corporate clients who just want to stay positive. There are only opportunities. They think they're going to give you apple pie, but I think what actually results is applesauce instead, that it's very bland, it doesn't have a lot of texture to it, it doesn't really move, motivate, and capture people. To be successful, you have to go to where behavioral economics goes, which is an acknowledgement that there are other emotions besides happiness that probably more fundamentally drive outcomes and behavior. And to make my point, we know from some of our own work that here's a case where you have the smiling family together and everyone has these bland social smiles, and the level of skepticism here, very high indeed, 17%. Most people can sense that the smiles aren't genuine, and accordingly they reject it. And that's true because different kinds of smiles, true smiles versus social smiles, have a different rhythm to them. One of the problems with the fake smiles that are almost an epidemic in advertising is that they come on too fast, they linger way too long, and once they're done, they just kind of drop off the face almost like a guillotine. True smile has a much more natural rhythm to it, rather like a wave breaking on the shore. So let's talk about where we can go in terms of bringing in the negative emotions that set up the contrast that frankly makes the solution more valuable. If you don't feel the problem, the solution does not have as much value. So in my book, About Face, I have a portion that talks about happiness and talks about the different essential principles of behavioral economics. And if you start to look at them, conformity, resistance to change, they really have to do with fear. Overconfidence, probability blinders, impulsivity have a lot more to do with misplaced hopes, overweened hope, overconfidence. So it's that tension, that dynamic between fear and overconfidence that I think drives so much of behavior and has been very well documented by the behavioral economists. So if you were to think about emotions, I have the 7 core emotions on the right. I have 7 themes of what they address, what they're fundamentally about on the left. If you might rather quickly try to mix and match here, which of these 7 themes on the left does contempt apply to, fear, which one does it apply to, and so forth. I think I've given this away a bit by how I introduced the emotions, but let's see if you can kind of hold on to what I told you earlier, and as quickly as possible try to supply the answers. And here they are. Fulfillment, happiness, attention, surprise, risk, fear, control, anger. I want to be in control of my life. I want to make progress. I want to understand things. Don't want to be insulted. Rejection, disgust, disappointment, sadness, and distrust, contempt, because it means I really don't respect you and I discount what you're telling me. And each emotion really in turn has its own storyline that can be followed. And those storylines run based on the emotions that are evoked in consumers, and they may be, frankly, in conflict with the official message, the rational messaging that a company is trying to introduce in its advertising. So to know what these storylines are, how they get triggered, whether they are suitable and reinforce your official storyline, I think is one of the underpinnings of successful marketing and takes into account that wider circumference of emotions that behavioral economics is so much about. So let's move to the last section here as quickly as possible so we can get to the Q&A. And that has to do with being on message, yes, but also on emotion. Again, do you create the right emotion at the right time to reinforce your connection? We need to move from talking points to feeling points, and I think behavioral economics, with its considerable emphasis on emotions, recognizes that. So here's one example. Allstate, we tested a, go back one. We tested a TV spot that showed a series of car accidents. In this case, high frustration, but high frustration in a way that I would argue is on emotion. Because if you are having a car wreck on the way to work, most definitely you are not in control of your life and you are not making progress, and therefore the frustration is appropriate and reinforces the messaging. Another successful instance, some testing done for Rosetta Stone. Obviously, their entire position is to say you will learn a foreign language quickly and easily, and if they were to confuse you in the course of the ad, then that is diametrically opposed to their objective and the value proposition they're providing you. So this low frustration mark is the inverse, quite obviously, of the Allstate example, but it's spot on for what they're trying to accomplish. Now, here's an instance where there's something that's both on emotion and off emotion. For V&D in Holland, we were testing a Christmas spot. The woman is out shopping at Christmas. It's dark. She's alone. It's cold. She doesn't know if the gift she will buy for her family will be well received. And she feels both anxiety and sadness on emotion. When the gifts are successful, she's back home. It's indoors. It's well lit. She's warm. Everyone's happy. She's happy too. And most importantly, the viewers are happy. They feel a large burst of true smile response to this part of the advertisement. On the other hand, V&D also has a cafe where they sell food. No one can make out what is in these two frames. In fact, it is food on a table at Christmas time. They feel frustration. This part, off emotion. Do you want surprise early or do you want it late? A rational study done with self-reporting by professors here in the U.S. would tell you that actually it could be equally good if the TV spot had the peak of surprise early or late. In fact, we found that a late payoff with the surprise peak brought a lot more true smile activity. So if you suspend that tension and that surprise, that turn of events late into the TV spot, much better payout in terms of getting that top level of happiness reaction. Quickly, just a few more. Off emotion, all of these. This shows a extreme skateboarder. He's wiped out. You can almost wonder if the person suffered a concussion or worse. This fear reaction spills right over into the product. Now that helps make the product seem edgy, but the product can kill you. Not so good for the brand equity and product equity. Sadness. In a commercial for a company that sells packaged goods for the family, a beach scene looks very nice, except it's also a essentially empty beach, just the lone individual, and people reacted by feeling sadness, off emotions. And one more, for Crystal Light in this case, the women felt sadness because the super thin model and the tagline, "Pump It Up," all seemed a bit too aspirational to them. And sadness, anticipatory disappointment. I can't live up to the implied standard of being, the size 0 dress. So, in conclusion, I would suggest that bland consistency, pretending as if there are no problems, only solutions and opportunities, is not so good. And that if you can create the powerful emotional tension and dynamic between feeling the problem, using negative emotions, but using them appropriately, leveraging and summoning what you want, makes the solution stand out that much more starkly and with that much more value for the consumer. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the questions. Thank you.